So I came across this recent post on Twitter where this person is saying, I think ageism is killing my job search. So I want to break it down and give my perspective as somebody who has seen a lot of people in this exact scenario. And this is kind of the reality of it, and something that you have to be really careful of if you're in your career, you've been employed for a long period of time, and then suddenly you find yourself on the open market and you haven't experienced the recent job market, because things are quite different. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So the post says, I think ageism is killing my job search. 43 years old, 15 years of experience as a project manager. I'm assuming that's what they're referring to as PM. Led a team of 20 plus, shipped products worth 100 million. So, reasonably decent sized team. Seems like a middle manager, decent sized volume of product shipped. So this person, they're definitely an experienced person. So laid off recently from a VP role. So they're a C-suite or junior C-suite, depending on the size of the company, and now applying for senior PM, principal PM roles. So basically, they are going down in level. It might actually be a couple of levels down. From VP down to PM is, in most cases, a PM, a project manager, is an individual contributor. So when you think of leveling, an individual contributor, a lot of times the titles will indicate a certain job. Like a project manager is probably one of the biggest ones, where you have a manager title, but you're actually not doing manager work. It's actually an individual contributor job in most cases. Now, if it's a manager of product management where the person is managing other product managers doing the work, then that's a different story. But when I see strictly a role that says a senior PM, or in this case, a principal CM, that generally will indicate to me that this person is applying for individual contributor jobs. So this is a VP role that they had in their past, and now they're applying for roles 2 levels down. And I'm assuming the reason why they're doing this is because the job market is really crappy right now, and they're just trying to get back to work. There is a circumstance where some people are interested in not doing the VP work anymore. Leading people tends to suck. Dealing with all the stress that's involved with it. Everybody's beating you up from both sides. And a lot of people aren't cut out for VP work. So some people just want to move down into what they consider to be an easier role, or something that's closer to the actual work. Because as you get up in these levels, higher up, it becomes much more strategic, much less hands-on. And in fact, in a VP role, you're probably not doing any technical work at all, or very little. Most of it is going to be directing and planning work for other people. So you're getting the right people in place to do it. You're making sure you got the right resources in place. But generally speaking, a VP role is not for everybody. And so this person, we don't have the full story here, but this person may be deciding that they just don't want that role anymore. But I think the more likely scenario is that this person is struggling to get back to work. And I mean, obviously through the title, ageism is killing my job search, but they're struggling to get back to work, and they're probably just trying to take whatever they can get at this point. So this is where, this reverse mobility becomes a thing. So that's a really important point. We'll come back to that in a minute. So it says the response rates are way lower than when I had a job or was job hunting 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the market was very different than it is. It's just, let's just say it's right at the beginning of the pandemic. So in 2019, let's just say, things were relatively, I shouldn't say stable, because they were starting to become topsy-turvy there, but they were generally, it was what I consider to be a quote-unquote normal job market, probably the last year of the normal job market, where you could apply for jobs, you get a reasonable response rate back. As long as you had a decent resume, you didn't have generally that much trouble. The market was reasonably healthy, and people tended to stay in jobs for a long period of time. But after 2020, everything changed. The pandemic came, kind of wiped out the normal job market, and we've never really gone back. In fact, I don't think we'll ever go back. Things have become much more fractional at this point, much more cyclical, and the cycles are shortening. We used to be, you'd get one layoff every maybe 8 to 10 years, and now it seems like there's a layoff every 2 to 3 years. So you're lucky if you can hold on to a job. I mean, to me, like, this whole concept of job hopping should be like not a valid thing to assess on somebody on a resume, especially in the last few years, because companies just lay people off so consistently, or they've taken a full-time job in 2019 or 2020, laid that position off, and then created fractional work with it. So they would have a contract position now, and then they would just get rid of the person after a year or two once they were done with it. There was not a long-term, it's like kind of like a what have you done for me lately? You work that particular job, you could be amazing at it, and at the end of the year, if they no longer consider you to be valuable to the company, they're not going to try to relocate you or to kind of save you for another job. They'll just lay you off, and that's just what the new market is like. So a lot of people who haven't been in the job market for 5 years, I'm assuming that this person has been out of the job market for the last 5 years, finding themselves coming back into the job market forcibly, if you're not prepared for it, it can be a very eye-opening experience. If there was a sweet spot in the job market for individual contributors, which frankly, I don't think that there even is, but if there was a sweet spot, I would say it's probably somebody in their mid 20s to early 30s who has about 5 to 7 years, maybe 8 years of experience doing individual contributor work. They're not strictly entry level, because those people often will find that either technology is taking their job or they are somebody who is considered to be not experienced enough. So they kind of like fall outside of the sweet spot. Then the people who are over the age of 35 and older, which is crazy to think that over the age of 35 you'd be dealing with ageism, but nonetheless, that's kind of when it starts. You're too experienced, and you got this like sweet spot band of like 25, 27, 28, maybe 30, 32, somewhere in that range, where you've got enough experience, but maybe you're not quite ready to move into bigger jobs. Maybe you're kind of like looking at principal level, but you're not quite there yet. That's probably the only sweet spot. So in this person's case, being 43 years old, he probably is a little overqualified for an individual contributor role, especially if he has the VP title. So he continues that the roles are asking for between 5 to 8 years of experience. Again, that's that sweet spot that they're looking for. And he's being rejected for being overqualified, which is probably to be expected. There are a lot of people looking for jobs right now, and they can find people who have 5 to 8 years of experience without much problem. The term overqualified gets used a lot, but essentially what the teams are saying, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but this is what the teams are saying, is if you took that position and you only took it because you couldn't get a job at your band, whatever you're in, in this case, a VP level role, or even a senior director, or even a manager level position. If you can't get that job, realistically, they know that you're taking this position because you need a job. And for the employer, they are trying to fill a position. And again, this is ironic and a little bit rich. I fully understand this, but they are looking for an investment in a person that they think can stay on for a few years, even if they have no intention of actually keeping them for a few years. They want to feel like the person isn't going to be immediately looking for a new job. And quite frankly, what I would ask this person is, if I was speaking with him, is if you get these jobs, these senior PM or principal level PM roles, are you going to keep on looking for a job? If a VP role comes along, are you going to bounce out the first minute that you get it? And I think we have to be honest with ourselves that most of us probably would. If you were, a certain level of income and a certain level of responsibility, and you had to settle for a job beneath, like I should say, like below your level, not necessarily beneath you, but below your level, you probably would be looking for other opportunities as you took that job. You're just trying to stop the bleeding. And this becomes a very vicious cycle of it's kind of like this circle. You're too qualified for the role, so you can't get the job. But it's like you keep on spinning around in this wheel. So now this person is really kind of in dire straits. Since startup roles are going radio silent the second they see my experience level, they're probably worried about compensation and being able to keep the person happy long term, which is a valid concern by a hiring team. I'm trying to be like neutral and look at both sides. I understand this person is just like, I'll take a job, it doesn't matter. But from a company's perspective, they probably will feel like if you took the job, they couldn't pay you enough. You're going to be looking over their shoulder constantly at the next better opportunity that's coming your way. And again, most people probably are. It says the interviewers are literally younger than my PM career, asking if I can move fast. which is an interesting term, this move fast, because it's indicating that you're like kind of an old dog, no new tricks. Your pacing is slower, and that's crazy at 43 that they're already asking this, and especially at a VP role, like it's a pretty fast-paced, fast-moving role. So this is a really interesting language, this moving fast. Listen subtly. I mean, you could, if you wanted to go down this route, you could, if you heard these things, you could make a case for age discrimination. It's difficult to prove, but these are kind of those indicators. I mean, your ears might perk up, but questions about whether or not I'd be happy stepping back into IC work. I didn't even read this far, and I literally was calling that out. I honestly think that this person is probably just taking this position because they need to get a job. Would they truly be happy? Maybe they would. Maybe they would be very happy to move back down to an IC role and just don't have any desire to continue in a VP level role. But it's going to require some pretty careful messaging. And in a weird way, you almost have to dumb down your resume and your profile to match the level of the position. If this is the case, it requires you to be very calculated in your approach. You just can't send off your VP level resume and hope to get people to take you seriously, because you're going to be, in most cases, the recruiter is going to just reject you because of these exact things. So you almost have to, in a way, make your experience look lesser than it probably is and focus mostly on what you did in the IC space. If that becomes something where it's further and further back in your career, you're starting to distance yourself from that, it can be a very tricky situation to solve on a resume. There's also something to do with branding here, and you should probably think about doing some direct marketing and networking and establishing, if you truly want to be an IC, you probably need to make sure that you're really showing expertise in other places like LinkedIn or personal websites or some other place where you can show that you truly have the technical chops. Another concern would be if you're that far away from the work. Say he was in a VP level position for 8 to 10 years. The technology at the ground level, because you're not doing it boots on the ground day to day. Your skills start to atrophy. You start to grow in other ways. Obviously the VP, you're going to be growing strategically. You're going to be growing through setting budgets and all that kind of stuff. It's a whole different competency of work, but your skills are going to atrophy for the original job type. So, what you did 10 years ago is probably not as relevant. That's why usually in a resume, I'll recommend that you don't go much past 10 years back in your resume, because things change so much. Technologies change, software changes, methodologies change, processes change. And if you're higher up on the totem pole, you're a little bit insulated from that because your world is focused on a totally different part of the business. And in this case, I think that these are all, while people don't want to hear this, I fully understand it. People don't want to hear it, but it is the reality of the job market. Companies, even before the job market went bad, would have probably had an issue with it. For me, I think that this person's biggest issue is the fact that they're in a job market that's bad and they can't get back into a VP level role. If it was a normal job market, there probably would be more VP level roles. VP level roles are hard to get, period. So you never really want to find yourself being laid off at a VP level because it's very catastrophic. There's not a lot of jobs, and you're playing complete catch up. And if you're a senior director and above, and you think that there's any inclination in your company that there is going to be a potential layoff or your performance is being looked at very closely, you have to be very proactive. You cannot let the other shoe drop, because entering into the open job market already, the available jobs are much, much smaller. And when you have a bad job market on top of it, it's even smaller than still. And then taking into account that there are other people in the job market looking for those same roles, probably more people than in general. And then if it's truly an alpha opportunity, you have other people who are coming up through the ranks who are considered to be fast movers, who are looking at those positions as career hops for them. And so it becomes a very catastrophic thing. So I would be looking around my organization if I'm not feeling completely comfortable, like reading the tea leaves, since things are sounding or feeling off in those team meetings, your bosses maybe, starting to question things or exclude you from certain things. Those are things that you got to be really careful of, because if you become unemployed at that level in a bad job market, and especially if you're, I hate to say 43 because that still seems pretty young for me, but if you're, in your 50s and 60s, that's a tough situation to be in. You always want to be in control of how you exit an organization and have a strategy set up. Most people just wing it. And it's shocking to me the number of people, even at that level, who completely wing their careers. They have no contingencies. They don't have any alternative income streams. They haven't put together any kind of network or a brand of any sort. And so when they hit the open market, nobody knows who they are. They have no networks to lean on. They're literally applying to the same jobs using applications like everybody else. And it becomes almost impossible to land a position. There's so few of them. And now you're dealing with the ageism piece as well, especially with that, again, that reverse mobility becomes a real big problem. And then finally, it says subtle comments about energy and needing fresh perspective. And one young hiring manager asked if I could adapt to a startup culture. So I was also applying to a startup roles. And the startup culture is a very unique beast. I've worked in startups myself, pre-IPO startups, and I've worked in the biggest of the big. I've worked at Amazon. I've like literally the whole gamut. And I would say the startup culture was much different. There's some things I really liked about it, but there's some things that it was like eye-opening. And if you're somebody that has only worked in large corporations, going into a startup culture is a very different experience. And so that is a valid thing, especially at a VP level, because they're trying to reduce the risk of a hire. Every decision that they make, every interview they put you through, what they're trying to do is just reduce the risk of the hire, because they may not get the headcount back if they get it wrong. So they're trying to reduce the higher of the risk there. And that's from the candidate's perspective. We're trying to reduce our risk by shoring up the amount of possibility that they're assessing us on. So if we don't know what they're assessing us on, we need to bring it into a more siloed kind of a experience bubble, if that makes any sense at all. And so it's very strategic when you get into these levels, especially when you're interviewing at these very senior levels. So is ageism a thing in the job market? Yeah, unfortunately it is. And in this case, this is like prototypical ageism, where a person who has been working in a certain job type for a long time did not have any contingencies. I'm assuming because they're in this position, this is indicative of somebody that doesn't have any contingencies. They didn't build their networks. They didn't plan ahead. They weren't proactive. And I know I'm like making a lot of assumptions here, but this is based off of very limited information. But this is the story of ageism that I see most frequently in my career coaching practice. And so there are things that you can do, but it becomes much more difficult to do it when you're unemployed and facing this obstacle. So again, you got to first thing is going to be writing a really solid resume that tries to minimize some of the objections, the red flags. But then it's also going to be very targeted and careful networking and how you portray yourself and branding. And then when you do get these interviews, you have to expect that they're going to be asking you this stuff, that they're going to be challenging on you. And if you're not careful and you don't have the right frame, you establish your frame early in the interview. If you don't establish the right frame early enough, you are likely going to end up in a defensive interview. And defensive interviews, if they're challenging you on everything and you're in your heels trying to defend yourself, you are likely going to never get the job offer. You can just tell them, like, you may as well just give me the rejection letter now, because that's how they end up. If you're in a defensive posture, especially early into your interview, they almost never turn into a next round of interviews, or certainly not an offer. So you just have to be really careful. You have to have a strategy. So again, ageism is definitely a thing, and you have to be really careful to take the steps today. Don't sit back thinking that it won't happen to you. Don't think that one day 43 won't hit you. And if you're not prepared, when you're in your early and mid 20s, it's easy to think that that's so far off in the future. But the folks who hit 40, leave a comment and let them know how quickly this comes up on you and how unprepared a lot of us are. And I was the same way. I mean, this is not me being critical of people, the people who are experiencing ageism, because I was the same way. I learned my lesson the hard way in some cases, in some ways. And I've seen a lot of people going through this stuff. So there's some steps that you got to take, but it is possible. And I have seen and coached people successfully into better jobs where they didn't have to do the reverse mobility, but it does require you to immediately take stock of where you are and what your strategy is. This strategy that he's showing here is not going to work. I was just reading through it and immediately, I didn't even finish it and I was already calling out all the issues. So anyway, this is what happens with ageism. And if you need help in a similar circumstance, I do offer some training opportunities, a website called A Life After Layoff. There's a bunch of courses in there that help deal with all this stuff, the interviewing, the resume writing, career strategy. You can check that out over there on A Life After Layoff. But I also offer some limited one-on-one coaching. So if you need some more targeted help on how to get through this stuff, we can work through strategy, and I can give you a kind of a neutral, a gentle perspective that gentle but firm is probably the right way. Gentle but firm perspective to try to get you back to work as quickly as you can. But anyway, appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.